They say heartbreak is supposed to feel like a shattering, like glass breaking in your chest. But when I saw Jabari in our bed, tangled up with a woman who was wearing my silk robe, I didn't shatter. I froze. And then, I calculated. My brain didn't scream, "Why me?" It screamed, "Audit." I stood in the doorway of the bedroom I paid 70% of the rent for. I looked at the champagne bottle on the dresser, the one I'd bought for our 3-year anniversary. Vintage Dom. $300. A sunk cost. I looked at the woman, blonde, terrified, scrambling to pull the duvet up to her chin. And I looked at Jabari. His eyes were wide, that charming boyish panic setting in, the same look he gave me when he overdrew our joint account last month. Kamaria, baby, wait, it's not what it looks like. It was exactly what it looked like. It was a breach of contract. It was a liquidation of assets. It was a waste of my time. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the champagne bottle. I simply raised my phone, snapped a high-resolution photo of his naked backside and her terrified face, and turned on my heel. "Keys on the counter," I said, my voice terrifyingly steady. "You have exactly 1 hour to vacate the premises before I call the building security and have you removed as a trespasser. Your name isn't on the lease, Jabari." I checked. I walked out of the apartment, took the elevator down to the garage and got into my Mercedes. My hands weren't shaking until I gripped the steering wheel. Then the tremor hit. Not sadness. Rage. Pure, cold, concentrated rage. Welcome back, my fierce hearts and midnight dreamers. Before we dive into the wreckage, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that like button and tell me, what is the pettiest thing you've ever done to an ex? I love seeing our little dark romance family getting vindictive in the comments. Every click helps us unravel these dangerous love stories. So find your quiet place, dim the lights, and let's see what happens when a good woman decides to be very, very bad. Let's begin. I sat in the dark parking garage, the engine idling. The silence was deafening. I was a forensic accountant for one of the top firms in the city. My life was made of numbers, logic, and predicting risk. Jabari was the variable I had miscalculated. I had treated him like a safe investment, a fixer-upper with potential. I had poured emotional capital into a man who was morally bankrupt. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Perfect makeup. Sharp eyeliner. I was wearing the red dress I had bought specifically for tonight. It was backless, dangerous, and far too expensive to be wasted on a night of crying into a pint of ice cream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to erase him. I needed a cleanse. Not a juice cleanse, but a spiritual exorcism. I needed to feel something other than the humiliating sting of betrayal. I needed to feel power. I needed to replace the sensation of Jabari's mediocre touch with something that would burn the memory out of my skin. I shifted the car into gear and peeled out of the garage. I wasn't going home to my mother's house. I wasn't going to a friend's to vent. I was going to the Onyx Room. The Onyx Room wasn't just a club. It was a tax bracket. It was where the city's elite went to sin in private. Politicians, tech moguls, and men who didn't have job titles but had very heavy Swiss bank accounts. It was exclusive, expensive, and tonight, it was my hunting ground. I valeted the car and walked past the velvet rope. The bouncer, a mountain of a man named Tiny, nodded at me. He knew me. Not because I partied, but because I had helped the owner audit his inventory last year. "Evening, Miss Price," he rumbled. "Evening, Tiny." Inside, the bass hit me like a physical blow. The air smelled of expensive perfume, sweat, and spilled whiskey. The lighting was low, bathed in deep purples and aggressive reds. Bodies moved in a rhythmic mass on the dance floor, but I bypassed them. I headed straight for the VIP mezzanine. I ordered a martini. Dry, dirty, 3 olives. I drank it in one swallow. Then I turned my back to the bar and scanned the room. I was looking for a specific type of trouble. I didn't want a nice guy. Nice guys were just narcissists waiting for an opportunity. Jabari was a nice guy. I didn't want a businessman, they talked too much. I wanted a weapon. My eyes skimmed over a group of investment bankers laughing too loudly. Pass. A famous rapper surrounded by an entourage. Pass. Then, everything in the room seemed to tilt. In the far corner, nestled in the deepest shadows of the VIP section, was a semicircular leather booth. It was occupied by one man. He was terrifying. There was a physical void around him. The club was packed, shoulder to shoulder, yet there was a 10-foot radius of empty space around his table. Beautiful women walked by, glanced at him, and instinctively walked faster, shivering. Men in suits looked at him and then immediately looked at the floor. He was a predator sitting among prey. He was Asian, Korean specifically, with hair the color of ink that fell slightly over his eyes. He wore a black suit that cost more than my car, tailored so perfectly it looked like a second skin. No tie. The top 2 buttons of his shirt were undone, revealing a hint of a tattoo climbing up his throat. But it was his hands that caught my attention. One rested on the rim of a crystal tumbler, the other draped over the back of the leather booth. He wore heavy rings, silver and platinum skulls, thick bands that looked like they could break a jaw if he made a fist. He looked bored. Not the boredom of someone with nothing to do, but the boredom of a lion watching gazelles graze. He was waiting for something interesting to happen. Or he was waiting to kill someone. Risk assessment, extremely high. Potential reward, astronomical. I didn't hesitate. My logic brain, the part that kept me safe, screamed abort. But the wounded animal inside me, the woman who had been cheated on in her own bed, grabbed the wheel. I walked through the invisible barrier of fear that surrounded him. A large man in a suit stepped out of the shadows, his security. He started to raise a hand to stop me. The man in the booth didn't look up, but he raised one finger. A minute gesture. Let her pass. The guard stepped back, vanishing into the dark. I walked right up to the table. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't smile. I slid into the booth opposite him. Up close, he was devastating. His face was comprised of sharp angles and elegant cruelty. His eyes were dark, devoid of light, staring at the amber liquid in his glass. He didn't look at me, he just let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating. "You look like you're having a worse night than I am," I said. My voice was calm, cutting through the bass of the music. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, he lifted his eyes. The air left my lungs. His gaze was physical. It felt like being scanned by an X-ray machine that stripped away the dress, the makeup, and the pretense, seeing the rage boiling in my marrow. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. He just took a slow sip of his drink, watching me over the rim. "I have a proposition," I said, leaning forward. I placed my hands on the table. "No rings. No tan line where a ring used to be. I don't want your name. You don't need mine. I have a lot of anger I need to displace. And you look like the only man in this room capable of handling it." His eyes narrowed slightly. A flicker of interest? Or maybe annoyance. It was hard to tell with a man who looked like a statue carved from ice and violence. I continued, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I don't want dinner. I don't want conversation. I want to leave this place, go somewhere quiet. And I want you to make me forget that I exist for a few hours." The Silent King. That's what they called him, though I didn't know it then. He set his glass down. The sound of the crystal hitting the table was the only sound I could hear. He leaned forward. The shift in his posture was predatory. He invaded my personal space, his scent hitting me, sandalwood, gunpowder, and cold rain. He looked at my mouth. Then he looked at my eyes. He was searching for fear. I refused to give it to him. I held his gaze, chin lifted. "I am Kamaria Price. I balance books for Fortune 500 companies. I destroy liars for a living. I can handle you." He seemed to come to a conclusion. He reached into his jacket pocket. For a split second, I thought he was pulling a gun. Instead, he pulled out a black card and dropped a stack of bills on the table to cover a tab that hadn't even arrived yet. He stood up. He was tall, looming. The darkness seemed to cling to him as he rose. He buttoned his suit jacket with a singular, fluid motion, his heavy rings flashing in the strobe light. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable, and extended an elbow. He hadn't spoken a single word, not one syllable. He just nodded toward the exit. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly, but my head held high. I took his arm. His muscles were hard as granite beneath the expensive wool. As we walked toward the door, the crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. I felt the eyes of every woman in the room burning into my back, a mix of jealousy and horror. I wasn't the girl who got cheated on anymore. I was the woman walking out with the monster. And for the first time all night, I didn't feel broken. I felt dangerous. The sun hitting my face didn't feel like a new beginning. It felt like an interrogation lamp. I sat up, clutching a sheet that probably cost more than my first car, and did a rapid inventory of my poor life choices. Item 1. I was in a penthouse that overlooked the entire city. Item 2. My body ached in places I didn't know existed. A lingering, throbbing reminder of a stamina that defied basic human biology. Item 3. The space beside me was empty. I scanned the room. It was aggressive in its minimalism. Concrete walls, floor-to-ceiling glass, black furniture. No photos, no knickknacks, no warmth. It looked less like a home and more like a high-end holding cell. My clothes were scattered across the floor in a trail of evidence. My red dress, my heels, my bra hanging off a sterile abstract sculpture. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at the back of my neck. Last night hadn't just been sex. It had been a demolition. The Silent King, as the whispers in the club called him, had taken me apart and put me back together. And I had let him. I had been vulnerable. I had cried out. I had clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. Liability. My brain slammed the gavel down. Vulnerability is a liability. Emotions are overhead costs I cannot afford right now. Jabari had bankrupted me emotionally. I couldn't open a new line of credit with a stranger who looked like he murdered people for sport. I needed to close this account. Immediately. I scrambled out of bed, wincing as my feet hit the cold floor. I gathered my clothes with frantic efficiency. Dress on. Zipper pulled, heels. I didn't bother with the underwear, I just shoved it into my purse. I needed to leave before he came back. If I saw him, if I looked into those dark abyss-like eyes in the morning light, I might stay. I might want breakfast. I might want more. And that would be a disaster. I moved to the nightstand to grab my phone, and that's when the idea formed. A terrible, brilliant, defensive idea. If I left now, it was a one-night stand. A tryst. A memory that would haunt me. But if I paid him, it was a transaction. A service rendered. It stripped the intimacy out of the equation and reduced it to simple supply and demand. It put me back in the power position. I wasn't the heartbroken girl seeking comfort, I was the consumer purchasing a high-end product. I opened my wallet. I usually carried cash for emergencies, bribing bouncers, paying for parking in dodgy lots. I had about $500 in crisp 20s. I pulled the stack out. It looked pathetic against the black marble of his nightstand, but it was the principle that mattered. I found a notepad with a heavy embossed logo, SKM Holdings. I clicked a silver pen and wrote in my sharpest, most professional handwriting, "For your services. Keep the change." I placed the note on top of the cash. I stared at it for a second. It was insulting. It was crude. It was perfect. It was the emotional equivalent of an audit. Account closed. Balance 0. I grabbed my purse and walked out of the bedroom. The hallway was vast, silent, and intimidating. I found the private elevator at the end of the corridor. I pressed the call button, my heart hammering against my ribs. Come on. Come on. The soft ding of the elevator sounded like a gunshot in the quiet penthouse. Leaving so soon? The voice didn't come from behind me. It came from the side, from the shadows of an open doorway I hadn't noticed. I froze. Kyung-mok stepped out. If he looked dangerous in a suit, he looked devastating in the morning light. He was wearing a black silk robe loosely tied, revealing a chest defined by lean corded muscle and a tapestry of ink. A dragon, dark and intricate, coiled over his shoulder and disappeared beneath the silk. His hair was messy, falling over his eyes. He held a mug of coffee in one hand. In the other, he held my stack of cash and the note. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the money in his hand. He flipped the note over, reading it again, as if the English language was suddenly foreign to him. Then, he looked up. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. His face, usually a mask of bored indifference, was cracked open by sheer confusion. His brows were drawn together. His jaw was tight. He walked toward me. He moved like smoke, silent, inevitable. He stopped 2 feet away, invading my personal space again, blocking the elevator doors. He held up the cash. His fingers, adorned with those heavy silver rings, tightened around the bills until the paper crinkled. "You are paying me?" His voice was deep, rusted, like an engine that hadn't been turned over in years. It vibrated in my chest. It wasn't the voice of a gigolo. It was the voice of a man who commanded armies. He took a step closer, towering over me. The smell of him, soap and that distinct metallic rain scent, flooded my senses. "Me?" He clarified, the word heavy with disbelief. He looked insulted. Deeply, profoundly insulted, as if I had just spit on his family crest. My instincts screamed at me to apologize, to take the money back, to run. But I dug my heels in. I was Camaria Price. I didn't backtrack. I straightened my spine and looked him dead in the eye. I summoned every ounce of corporate coldness I possessed. "I pay for what I use," I said, my voice clipping the air like shears. "We're even." His eyes widened slightly, a flash of something dangerous. Anger? Amusement? Obsession? Sparked in the darkness of his irises. The elevator behind me dinged again, the doors sliding open. I didn't wait for his response. I stepped backward into the car. He didn't move to stop me physically, but his presence was a wall I had to push through. I hit the lobby button. As the heavy steel doors began to slide shut, I caught one last glimpse of him. He was still standing there, clutching the $500 like it was a live grenade, staring at me with an intensity that burned. He wasn't bored anymore. The doors slammed shut, severing the connection. I slumped against the elevator wall, letting out a breath that shook my entire body. I had just treated the most dangerous man in New York like a cheap hooker. I checked my watch. 8:00 a.m. Time to go ruin my ex-boyfriend's life. In my line of work, we have a saying, numbers don't lie. People do. But numbers always tell on them eventually. I walked into the ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel, my heels clicking a sharp staccato rhythm on the marble floor. The Innovators and Investors brunch was in full swing. It was a room full of venture capitalists looking for the next unicorn, and desperate founders looking for a lifeline. I wasn't looking for either. I was looking for a reckoning. I was wearing a black oversized blazer I'd kept in my trunk over the red backless dress from the night before. I probably looked like a mix of a corporate executive and a woman on a walk of shame. But I didn't care. I felt electric. The lingering scent of kyung mok, sandalwood, and danger was still on my skin, acting like war paint. I spotted him immediately. Jabari was on the main stage, bathed in a warm spotlight. He looked the part of the visionary CEO, crisp navy suit, charming smile, hands gesturing expansively as he pointed to a slide deck full of buzzwords like synergy and disruptive growth. He was pitching his fintech startup. The one I had built the financial model for. The one I had funded with my bonus checks when he was between jobs. He scanned the crowd, flashing that $1,000,000 smile, and then his eyes landed on me standing by the double doors. He paused, just for a fraction of a second. Then, he smirked. I could read his mind as clearly as a spreadsheet. He thought I was there to beg. He thought I was the crazy ex-girlfriend crashing his big moment to weep and ask for closure. He winked at me, a tiny, arrogant twitch of his eyelid, before turning back to the investors. "We aren't just building an app," Jabari said, his voice smooth as silk. "We are building a legacy of trust." Trust. The audacity made me laugh. A cold, short sound that got lost in the room. I didn't storm the stage. That's what an amateur would do. I walked to the back of the room, to the audio-visual booth. The tech guy, a young kid in a hoodie, looked up, startled. "I'm with the presenter," I lied, flashing my company ID badge which looked official enough to anyone who didn't read the fine print. "He needs me to upload the Phase 2 financials. It's a surprise for the investors." The kid shrugged and moved aside. "HDMI 2 is live. Thanks." I plugged in my phone. I didn't have his pitch deck, but I had his passwords. Jabari was lazy. He used the same password for everything. His email, his bank, and his iCloud. Jabari Kang 1. Pathetic. On stage, Jabari was winding up for his big finish. So, I'm asking you to invest in transparency. Invest in the future. Now, I whispered. I tapped my screen. The growth trajectory graph behind Jabari vanished. In its place, a massive, high-definition screenshot of his Chase business checking statement appeared. The room went quiet. The murmur of networking died instantly. Jabari didn't notice at first. He was still smiling at the front row. Our burn rate is minimal. Is it? I spoke into the tech booth's override microphone. My voice boomed through the ballroom speakers, godlike and crystal clear. Jabari jumped, spinning around to look at the screen. His face went gray. The screen detailed a transaction from last Friday, the Onyx Room VIP service $3,500. Below that, Cartier $2,200. Below that, Grand Meridian Hotel King Suite $800. That's a glitch, Jabari stammered, backing away from the screen. Technical difficulties, folks. I swiped on my phone. The image changed. Now it was an email thread between Jabari and his co-founder. The subject line read, "The Investors." Sent from Jabari. "Just smile and nod, bro. These old guys are gullible idiots. Once the seed money hits on Monday, we book the trip to Tulum. They won't check the ledger for months. I'll just tell them it's R&D. A collective gasp went through the room. Chairs scraped against the floor as investors stood up, their faces hardening into masks of fury. Jabari looked like a trapped rat. He looked at the tech booth, squinting against the spotlight. Who is doing this? Cut the feed. I stepped out of the booth. I walked down the center aisle, the blazer slipping slightly off my shoulder to reveal the red strap of my dress. I held the microphone in my hand like a gavel. "It's not R&D, Jabari," I said, my voice calm, projecting to every corner of the room. "And it's not a glitch." He froze. "Kamaria? You told these people you were looking for capital for a revolutionary algorithm," I continued, stopping 10 feet from the stage. I looked at the investors, addressing them directly. "He doesn't have an algorithm. He has a gambling addiction, and a mistress named Tiffany who, judging by the Cartier charge, has better taste in jewelry than she does in men." "Kamaria, stop," Jabari hissed, his microphone picking up his desperation. "You're crazy. You're emotional. I am a forensic accountant," I corrected him. "I don't get emotional. I get evidence." I pointed at the screen. I swiped one last time. It showed his current liquidity. Balance, -$412. "You wanted to be a big shot, Jabari. I just balanced your books. You are officially insolvent." I dropped the mic. It hit the carpet with a heavy thud, but in the silence of the room it sounded like a bomb going off. For a second nobody moved. Then, the flash of a camera went off. Then another. I looked around. The younger attendees, the influencers and the social media interns, weren't looking at Jabari with disgust. They were looking at me with awe. Phones were held high. "Recording. Did you see that?" Someone whispered. "Savage. Queen behavior." Jabari was shouting now, trying to explain, but the investors were already walking out, making angry calls to their lawyers. He was finished. In the startup world, you can survive a failed product. You cannot survive public humiliation and confirmed fraud. I turned around and walked back up the aisle. I didn't run. I walked with the slow, deliberate stride of a woman who had just set a building on fire and didn't need to watch it burn because she knew the structural integrity was already compromised. I pushed through the double doors and out into the cool morning air. The valet brought my Mercedes around. My hands were trembling now. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a hollow ache. I had done it. I had nuked his life. But I still had to go home to an empty apartment and a bed that smelled like betrayal. I got into the car and tossed my phone onto the passenger seat. It buzzed. Then it buzzed again. Then it started vibrating continuously, a long, unbroken hum of notifications. I picked it up. Twitter was exploding. A video of my speech, taken from the front row, had been uploaded 3 minutes ago. It already had 50,000 views. The caption read, "She brought receipts." Literally, the petty accountant. Dawn Perignon audit. I refreshed the page. Trending #1, the petty accountant. Comments were rolling in faster than I could read them. I need her to audit my life. The way she dropped the mic. Chills. Who is she? I'm in love. I wasn't just a scorned woman anymore. I was a symbol. But as I scrolled, one comment caught my eye. It wasn't a cheer. It wasn't a joke. It was a single emoji, posted from an account with no profile picture, and the handle @SilentK. A skull. And below it, 2 words. Keep the change. My breath hitched. Kyung-mok was watching. My boss, Mr. Henderson, was hyperventilating near the water cooler. Apparently, having a viral vengeance icon on the payroll makes the partners nervous. I ignored him and focused on my spreadsheet, trying to pretend the world wasn't burning down outside. My phone was face down on my desk, vibrating every 4 seconds. I had gained 200,000 followers over the weekend. The petty accountant was now a meme, a mood, and apparently a feminist icon. Jabari had deleted his social media accounts after the hashtag Insolventex started trending with photos of his empty fridge. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt exposed. I adjusted my glasses and typed a formula into Excel, trying to lose myself in the comforting binary of numbers. If cell A1 is greater than cell B1, then true. Simple. Predictable. Then, the humming of the office stopped. It wasn't a gradual quiet. It was an instant, suffocating silence, the kind that happens when an apex predator enters a clearing. The clacking of keyboards ceased, the low murmur of phone calls cut off mid-sentence. Even the printer seemed to pause out of respect. I looked up from my monitor. Through the glass walls of my office, I saw the sea of cubicles part. Mr. Henderson, who was usually so blustery, pressed his back against the wall, looking like he wanted to merge with the drywall. A man was walking down the central corridor. He didn't have a visitor's badge. He didn't have a security escort. He had an aura of absolute terrifying authority. It was him. Kyung-mok looked different in the harsh fluorescent light of a corporate office. In the club, he had been a shadow. Here, he was a monolith. He wore a charcoal gray 3-piece suit that fit his broad shoulders with architectural precision. His stride was slow, unhurried, eating up the distance to my office with a terrifying inevitability. My heart slammed against my ribs. How did he get in here? This building has biometric security. He didn't stop at the reception desk. He didn't look at the gaping interns. He looked straight at me, through the glass, his dark eyes locking onto mine with the force of a physical grip. He reached my door. He didn't knock. He didn't turn the handle tentatively. He opened it, stepped inside, and closed it. Click. He turned the lock. The sound was small, but it echoed in the sudden intimacy of the room. The air in my office changed instantly. It became heavier, charged with static and the scent of sandalwood and rain. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I needed to be on my feet. I needed to be taller. "You can't be in here," I said. My voice was steady, thank God, but my pulse was fluttering in my throat. "This is a secure floor." Kyung-mok didn't answer. He walked toward my desk. He moved with a liquid grace that was at odds with his sheer size. He stopped at the edge of my desk, looming over the mahogany surface. He looked at my nameplate. Kamaria Price, Senior Forensic Accountant. Then he looked at me. His face was unreadable, a beautiful, cruel mask. He reached into his jacket pocket. I flinched, instinctively. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly at my reaction. A flicker of something, annoyance, crossed his face. He pulled his hand out slowly. He wasn't holding a weapon, he was holding a stack of cash. My cash. He placed it on my leather desk blotter, $500. The bills were perfectly aligned, the corners sharp. "I didn't order room service," I said, trying to summon the same bravado I had used on Jabari. I crossed my arms, protecting my chest. Kyung-mok leaned forward. He placed his hands on the desk, his heavy silver rings clicking against the wood. He invaded my space, his face inches from mine. I could see the flecks of gold in his obsidian eyes. I could see the pulse beating in his throat, right where the dragon tattoo began. "And I am not a service you can purchase, Miss Price," he said. His voice was a low rumble, deep and smooth like polished gravel. It wasn't the voice of an insulted man anymore. It was the voice of a man explaining gravity to someone who had just jumped off a cliff. He reached into his pocket again. This time, he pulled out a card. He placed it next to the money. It wasn't a standard business card. It was heavy, black matte cardstock, with embossed gold foil. There was no phone number, no email address. Just a symbol, a stylized geometric dragon, and 3 letters. Scam. My blood ran cold. I knew that logo. Everyone in finance knew that logo. Scam Holdings. They owned half the real estate in the city. They owned the shipping docks. They owned the security firm that guarded this very building. And the rumors said Scam stood for Sim Kyung Mook. And that, Scam Holdings was just the clean face of the Seoul, New York syndicate. I looked up at him, my mouth dry. You're him. The Silent King. I am the man you tried to tip. He corrected softly. Like a waiter. He walked around the desk. I turned to face him, my back pressing against the window. We were 20 floors up, but I felt cornered. I didn't know. I whispered. Ignorance is not a defense in your line of work, is it, accountant? He stopped a foot away from me. He was so tall I had to crane my neck to look him in the eye. You calculate risk. You analyze data. And yet, you walked into my territory, used my body to exorcise your ghost, and then insulted my honor with... He gestured dismissively at the money. Night lunch money. It was $500, I argued, my temper flaring despite the fear. That's a lot for... For what? He stepped closer. His thigh brushed against mine. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through me that had no business being there. For a night of forgetting? For the way you screamed my name? My face burned. We're even. I took what I needed. I paid. I left. That's how transactions work. That is how business works, he murmured, his voice dropping an octave. He reached out and, with one finger, tucked a loose curl of hair behind my ear. His touch was scorching. But this is not business. You made it personal when you left that note. He trailed his finger down my jawline, stopping at my pulse point. He could feel my heart racing. He smiled, a small, dark, terrifying curve of his lips. You have drawn attention to yourself, Camaria. You are viral. You are exposed. And because you were seen with me, you are now a curiosity to people who are far less patient than I am. He pulled his hand back and straightened his jacket. The moment of intimacy vanished, replaced by the cold armor of the king. You made a mistake, he said, his eyes hard again. You tipped a king. He turned and walked toward the door. He unlocked it with a sharp click. He paused with his hand on the handle, looking back at me over his shoulder. You owe me a debt now, Camaria Price, he said. Not money. I have enough money. You owe me your pride. He opened the door. The sounds of the office rushed back in, phones ringing, people talking, but it all sounded distant. And I always collect, he added. Then he walked out. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway. I looked down at my desk. The $500 sat there, mocking me. Next to it, the black card with the golden dragon seemed to glint in the fluorescent light. My knees finally gave out, and I sank into my chair. I had audited Jabari, and won. But I had just opened a negotiation with the devil, and I had a feeling the interest rates were going to be lethal. Paranoia is just a heightened state of awareness. That's what I told myself as I walked to my car, my keys protruding from my knuckles like Wolverine claws. The parking garage echoed with the sound of my own footsteps, but my brain was registering a discrepancy. There was a second rhythm. It was faint, scuffling, out of sync with the sharp click of my heels. A syncopated beat in the heavy silence of the P2 level. I stopped. The sound stopped. I tightened my grip on my keys. My Mercedes was 20 feet away, a silver sanctuary under the flickering yellow sodium lights. I scanned the shadows between the concrete pillars. I know you're there, I called out. My voice bounced off the concrete, sounding braver than I felt. And just so you know, the cameras on this level are high definition and cloud-backed. Smile. A figure detached itself from the darkness behind Pillar 4B. It wasn't a stranger. Jabari? I almost didn't recognize him. The man who stepped into the light wasn't the polished, arrogant CEO who had stood on stage 2 days ago. He was a wreckage. His designer suit was wrinkled and stained with something dark, coffee or sweat. His tie was gone, his top button missing. A patchy dark stubble covered his jaw, and his eyes were rimmed with red, darting around frantically like a cornered animal. He looked like he hadn't slept since the live stream. "You ruined me," he rasped. His voice was cracked, dry. I didn't step back. I stood my ground, my disgust overriding my caution. "I didn't ruin you, Jabari. I just turned the lights on. You did the rest yourself." He took a step toward me, his movements jerky. "They froze my accounts, Cam. Everything. Even the offshore ones. I can't even buy a plane ticket. That's what happens when you commit fraud," I said coldly. I looked him up and down, curling my lip. "God, look at you. You look like a bad credit score, Jabari." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "Stop it. Stop talking to me like I'm one of your damn spreadsheets. Then stop acting like a liability," I snapped. "Go home. Call a public defender. Turn yourself in before the SEC does it for you. I can't go to the police." He screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched panic. The sound echoed wildly in the garage. "It's not just the SEC, Cam. I borrowed money. Real money. From people who don't send subpoenas. They send hitmen." My stomach tightened. "Who did you borrow from?" He laughed, a manic, wet sound. "I needed bridge capital until the investors signed. I went to the Park Syndicate. I thought I could pay them back Monday. But then you destroyed the deal." The Park Syndicate. I knew the name. In my research into Kyung Mok after the club, I had learned about the rival factions. The Park family were the butchers to Kyung Mok's architects. They were messy, loud, and brutal. "That sounds like a you problem," I said, inching toward my car door. "I'm leaving." "No." He lunged, cutting off my path. "You don't get it. I can't pay them. They gave me a choice. Money or trade." I froze. "Trade?" He looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine tears in his eyes. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity. "You're famous now, Cam. The petty queen. And everyone saw you leave the Onyx room with the Silent King. They think you're his girl. His mistress." "I'm not anyone's mistress," I hissed. "The Parks don't care," Jabari babbled, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "They think you're valuable to him. They think if they have you, they have leverage over SKM. They told me if I bring you to them, the debt is wiped. Clean slate." I stared at him, the man I had lived with for 3 years, the man I had cooked dinner for, the man I had loved. "You sold me?" I whispered. The betrayal was so absolute it didn't even hurt, it just left a void. "To a gang? To save your own skin?" "I didn't have a choice." He wailed. "There is always a choice," I said. "You're just a coward." I turned to run back toward the elevators. Tires screeched. A black cargo van, headlights off, roared up the ramp and slammed on its brakes, blocking the exit path. The side door slid open with a heavy, metallic grinding noise. 2 men jumped out. They were not like Jabari. They were professionals. They wore nondescript gray work clothes and tactical gloves. They didn't look frantic. They looked bored. Efficient. One of them held a zip-tie restraint. The other held a stun baton that crackled with blue electricity. I backed up, trapped between the van, the pillar, and my ex-boyfriend. Jabari reached into his waistband. He pulled out a gun. It was a small, cheap, snub-nosed revolver, shaking violently in his grip. He pointed it at my chest. "Don't run, Cam," he sobbed. "Please don't run. If you run, they'll hurt you. If you go with them, maybe he'll pay the ransom and you'll be fine." "You are insane," I said, my voice low. My brain was racing. Distance to the elevator, 30 yards. Too far. Distance to the fire alarm, 10 yards. Possible. The 2 men from the van approached silently, flanking me. They were hurting me. "I'm sorry, Cam," Jabari whispered, aiming the gun at me as the men closed in. "It's just business." He reached out with his free hand to grab my arm. I didn't faint. I didn't beg. I looked at the gun, then at the pros, then at Jabari's sweaty, treacherous face. I shifted my weight to my back foot. I tightened my grip on my keys until the metal bit into my palm. Business? I snarled, bracing myself. Jabari, you're about to find out that I'm a terrible investment. I didn't wait for him to grab me. I moved. There is a common misconception that accountants are soft. We aren't. We spend our days hunting for lies and cutting dead weight. Violence is just a physical audit. Jabari reached for me, his hand shaking, his eyes wide with a pathetic mix of apology and desperation. He thought he was grabbing a victim. He was grabbing a hornet's nest. As his fingers brushed the sleeve of my blazer, I didn't pull away. I stepped into him. I drove my right fist forward, the brass house key and the jagged edge of my car key, protruding from between my knuckles, buried themselves deep into the soft muscle of his shoulder. It wasn't a warning shot. It was a puncture wound. Jabari shrieked, a high, thin sound, and the revolver slipped from his clammy grip. It hit the concrete and skittered away into the darkness under a parked SUV. He stumbled back, clutching his bleeding shoulder, staring at me in horror. You stabbed me, he wailed. I liquidated you, I snarled. I didn't have time to celebrate. The first pro, the one with the zip ties, was on me. He was fast. He wrapped a thick arm around my throat from behind, lifting me off my feet to cut off my air. Big mistake. He had lifted me, which meant my legs were free, and I was wearing Christian Louboutins with a 120mm steel reinforced stiletto heel. I didn't panic. I calculated the trajectory. I drove my right heel down with the force of a pile driver, aiming for the spot where his metatarsals met his ankle. Crunch. The sound was sickeningly wet, like stepping on a bag of potato chips. The man grunted, his grip loosening instantly as his body reflexively folded around the shattered bones in his foot. I dropped to the ground, spun around, and shoved him hard into the concrete pillar. He slid down, gasping, clutching his foot. 2 down. 1 to go. The second pro, the one with the stun baton, was smarter. He hung back, watching his partner writhe on the floor. He clicked the baton. Zap. Zap. The blue arc of electricity illuminated his grim smile. Feisty bitch, he muttered. He lunged. I scrambled backward, my hand grasping for anything. My fingers closed around the cold red metal of the fire extinguisher mounted on the pillar. It was heavy, maybe 10 pounds of pressurized chemical retardant. I yanked it off the bracket just as the baton swung toward my face. I ducked, feeling the static electricity lift the hairs on my cheek. I used the momentum of my crouch to swing the extinguisher upward in a vicious arc. The metal tank connected with the man's jaw with a reverberating clang. He didn't scream. He just dropped. Lights out. I stood there, heaving for breath, the heavy red tank still gripped in my hands like a warhammer. My hair was wild, escaping its pins. My blazer was torn. Jabari was curled in a ball, sobbing. The man with the broken foot was groaning. The baton guy was unconscious. I had won. I was shaking, adrenaline flooding my system like battery acid. But I was standing. Then, the world exploded. A roar of an engine tore through the garage, louder than a jet turbine. Headlights blinded me. A black Maybach, sleek, armored and terrifying, drifted around the corner at 60 miles an hour. It didn't brake. It slammed into the side of the kidnapper's van with the force of a meteor. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. The van was pinned against the wall, crumpled like a soda can. The rear door of the Maybach flew open before the car even fully settled. Kyung Mok stepped out. He moved with a terrifying calm amidst the chaos. He held a suppressed pistol in his right hand. The man with the broken foot tried to reach for a weapon in his belt. Thwip. Kyung Mok didn't even stop walking. He fired a single shot. The man slumped over. Silent. Kyung Mok holstered the gun in a smooth, practiced motion and walked through the debris toward me. He stopped 3 feet away. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hissing of the radiator from the smashed van and Jabari's muffled whimpering. I stood my ground, clutching the fire extinguisher to my chest. I must have looked insane, a corporate woman with blood-spattered cheeks, holding industrial safety equipment like a weapon of mass destruction. Kyung Mok looked at the unconscious man at my feet. Then he looked at Jabari, bleeding and crying. Then he looked at the man he had just shot. Finally, he looked at me. I expected anger. I expected him to yell at me for being careless. But his pupils were blown so wide his eyes looked entirely black. He wasn't angry. He was mesmerized. He looked at me the way a starving man looks at a feast. His gaze traced the blood on my cheek, the wildness of my hair, the defiant set of my jaw. His chest rose and fell in a heavy rhythm. He was turned on. Incredibly, dangerously turned on. He stepped closer, invading my space, ignoring the fire extinguisher I was still brandishing. He reached out. His thumb, rough and warm, grazed my cheekbone, wiping away a smear of blood that wasn't mine. He looked at the red stain on his skin, then back at my eyes. "I was coming to save you," he said. His voice was a low purr, vibrating with a dark, primal approval. "It seems I am late to the performance." I dropped the fire extinguisher. It hit the ground with a heavy clang. My knees felt weak, the adrenaline crash finally hitting me. "I told you," I managed to whisper, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm not a damsel." "No," he agreed softly. "You are a queen of ashes." He turned his head slightly toward the shadows where his own men were now emerging from a follow-up SUV. He gestured vaguely at Jabari and the bodies. "Clean up the trash," he ordered. The tone was bored, dismissive. Jabari looked up, eyes bulging. No, wait, Kamaria, please." Kyung-mok didn't even look at him. He stepped in and scooped me up into his arms, bridal style. "Hey," I protested, pushing against his chest. The silk of his shirt was smooth under my hands, but the muscle beneath was hard as iron. "Put me down. I can walk. I have legs. You have bruises," he corrected, turning toward the Maybach. "And you have done enough work for one night." "I have my car," I argued weakly, though my head was already resting against his shoulder. The scent of him, gunpowder and rain, was overwhelming. "We will have it towed," he said, tightening his grip as he carried me toward the open door of his car. "Tonight, you stay in the fortress. I am not letting you out of my sight." Over his shoulder, I saw his men dragging a screaming Jabari toward the SUV. I didn't look back. I closed my eyes and let the monster carry me into the dark. The antiseptic stung, but the way he held my hand, like it was a rare artifact he was afraid to break, distracted me from the pain. "You have a fracture in your third metacarpal," Kyung-mok murmured, wrapping my knuckles in gauze. "And you ruined a very expensive pair of shoes." I sat on the edge of the marble vanity in his bathroom. My legs were dangling, my dress was torn, and I was exhausted. But watching the Silent King play nursemaid was a surrealism I couldn't quite process. "The shoes were a sunk cost," I muttered, wincing as he tightened the bandage. "And the foot I broke was worth the depreciation." He paused. He looked up at me through his lashes. For a second the mask slipped, and I saw a flicker of amusement. "You possess a terrifying amount of pragmatism, Kamaria. It keeps me alive." He finished the wrap and secured it with a metal clip. He didn't let go of my hand. He ran his thumb over the bandage, his touch strangely grounding. "It kept you alive tonight," he corrected, his voice dropping to that deep, gravelly register. "But pragmatism will not stop a bullet." He stepped back, washing his hands in the black stone sink. The water ran clear, washing away the traces of the violence he had inflicted on my behalf. "The men you hospitalized," he said, drying his hands on a towel. "They were not street thugs. They were lieutenants in the Park Syndicate. By beating them, you didn't just escape. You humiliated the Park family. You made them look weak." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "So? They'll sue me?" He turned to face me, leaning against the sink. "In my world, we do not sue. We erase. You are now a high-value target. They will not stop until they have balanced the scales. They will burn your apartment. They will find your mother. They will systematically dismantle everything you love until you are nothing but ash." The air left the room. My mother. My career. Everything I had built. "So what do? I asked, my voice small. "Go into witness protection?" "The government cannot protect you from the parks," he said simply. "Only I can." He extended his hand. "Come with me." I slid off the vanity and followed him out of the bathroom, through the dark hallway, into his office. It was a cavernous room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. On his massive desk there was a single document. It was bound in leather. "Sit," he commanded. I sat. He pushed the document toward me. "A solution," he said. I opened it. The legal jargon was dense, but I read contracts for a living. I scanned the preamble. Marriage Settlement Agreement and Cohabitation Contract. My head snapped up. Is this a joke? "I do not joke about legal binding agreements," he said, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. He slid one to me. "Drink, you will need it." I took a sip. It burned, but it steadied my nerves. "You want to marry me? I need a wife," he stated, sitting opposite me. He looked like he was discussing a merger, not a romance. "SKM Holdings is undergoing a massive government audit. I am attempting to acquire a logistics firm that will legitimize 70% of my revenue streams. The regulatory board is skeptical of my background. They view me as a gangster." "You are a gangster," I pointed out. "I am a businessman with diverse interests," he countered smoothly. "But to pass this audit, I need an image rehabilitation. I need stability. I need a wife who is beyond reproach. A professional. A forensic accountant with a spotless record would be persuasive." I looked back at the contract. I read the terms. Duration, 1 year. Obligations, public appearances, cohabitation in the primary residence, the Punton. Intimacy, no conjugal rights required. The marriage is in name only. Compensation. Full settlement of the wife's student loans, $82,000. Full settlement of the wife's current lease penalties. 5% equity in SKM. Logistics, legitimate entral upon dissolution of the contract. I did the math in my head. 5% of SKM Logistics. That was millions. It was generational wealth. It was freedom. But it was also insanity. I looked at him. He was watching me with that intensity again, like he was waiting for the numbers in my head to align. "You want to buy me?" I asked, my voice sharp. I tossed the contract onto the desk. "Is that it? You think because I'm in trouble you can just purchase a wife?" Kyung Mok stood up. He walked around the desk. He didn't stop until he was standing right beside my chair. He placed a hand on the backrest, leaning down until his lips were inches from my ear. "I am not buying you, Camaria," he whispered. The heat of his body radiated through my blazer. "I am acquiring a strategic asset." I shivered. "There are 1,000 women who would marry me for the money," he continued, his voice dark and compelling. "But they would crumble the first time a gun was drawn. They would leak my secrets. They would be liabilities." He pulled back slightly to look me in the eye. "You took down 3 men with a car key and a fire extinguisher. You understand risk. You understand leverage. You are the only person smart enough to run my books and dangerous enough to survive my world." I stared at him. He wasn't looking at me like a victim. He was looking at me like an equal. Like a partner. My brain ran the audit. Option A, go it alone, get hunted by the park syndicate, probably die. Option B, marry the king, get rich, get protected, and be close to him. The be close to him part was a risk factor I shouldn't ignore. The chemistry between us was volatile. No conjugal rights on paper was one thing. The way he looked at me was another. But I was Camaria Price. I didn't back down from a challenge. "I have conditions," I said, grabbing a pen from his desk. "Name them." "I'm not a trophy. I don't sit at home and look pretty. I want access. If I'm going to help you pass this audit, I need to see the books. The real books." He hesitated, a flicker of surprise. Then, a slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. "Agreed." I flipped to the back page of the contract. I wrote in the blank space at the bottom. Clause 14. The wife retains the right to audit the husband's activities at any time. Transparency is mandatory. I spun the contract around to face him. "Sign it," I challenged. He looked at the clause. He looked at me. The amusement in his eyes deepened into something possessive. "An audit," he mused. "Be careful what you dig for, Camaria. You might not like what you find in the dark." "I'm not afraid of the dark," I said. "I'm afraid of bad data." He chuckled, a low, dark sound that made my toes curl. He took the pen from my hand. His fingers brushed mine, lingering for a second too long. He signed his name in a sharp, aggressive scrawl. Sim Kyung Mok. It is done, he said, straightening up. Welcome to the syndicate, Mrs. Sim. I looked at the signature. I had just merged my life with the most dangerous man in the city. I capped the pen. Don't get comfortable. The audit starts tomorrow at 8 am. Criminals are surprisingly bad at math. You would think people who risk life in prison for money would count it better. But no. In my experience, they get lazy. They think violence covers up the decimal points. They think fear balances the ledger. But fear doesn't fix a variance in column B. I stood outside the heavy mahogany double doors of the strategic planning room, Kyung Mok's euphemism for the war room. Inside, the 12 captains of the syndicate were meeting. I could hear the low rumble of voices, the clink of glass, the heavy atmosphere of men deciding who lived and who died. I wasn't invited. I adjusted my blazer. I had chosen my outfit with the precision of a psychological operation. In a room full of men wearing black, gray, and navy, I was wearing a stark, blinding white suit. Sharp lapels, tailored waist, and pants that broke perfectly over my highest heels. I didn't knock. I pushed the doors open. The conversation inside died instantly. The room was thick with cigar smoke and testosterone. 12 men sat around a massive oval table made of dark wood. At the head sat Kyung Mok. He looked bored, spinning a whiskey glass on the table. When the doors opened, his hand stopped. He looked up. His eyes found mine. He didn't frown. He didn't look surprised. He just went perfectly still, watching. The other men were less composed. What is this? Lieutenant Han barked. Han was the captain of the shipping division. He was a thick-necked man with a scar running through his eyebrow and a deep-seated belief that women were decorative objects. He had been sneering at me for 2 weeks, calling me the accountant like it was a slur. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. We are in session. I walked into the room. The click of my heels cut through the silence. I carried a single red file folder. Sit down, Han, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was projected. Excuse me? Han's face flushed a blotchy red. He looked at Kyung Mok, expecting the king to discipline his unruly wife. When Kyung Mok didn't move, Han turned his sneer back to me. Mrs. Sim, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. The kitchen is on the 2nd floor. This is a meeting for men. A few of the other captains chuckled nervously. I didn't look at Kyung Mok for help. I didn't need it. I walked straight to the table. I didn't sit. I tossed the red file onto the polished wood. It slid across the surface, spinning perfectly to stop right in front of Han. Open it, I commanded. Han stared at the folder, then at me. I don't have time for your grocery lists. It's not a grocery list, I said, leaning my hands on the table and addressing the room. It's a forensic audit of the Busan shipping lane fuel costs for the last 3 quarters. I walked over to the whiteboard at the side of the room. I picked up a black marker. Lieutenant Han claims that fuel costs have risen 18% due to geopolitical instability, I said, uncapping the marker. I wrote 18% in big bold numbers, which would be a believable lie if I hadn't cross-referenced the Global Maritime Fuel Index. I wrote -2% next to it. Fuel costs are down 2%, I said, turning back to the room. Which means there is a 20% variance in the operating budget. The room was deadly silent now. The chuckles had evaporated. The captains were leaning forward. Money was a language they all understood. I dug deeper. I continued, walking toward Han. He was sweating now. I found the invoices. We are paying a supplier called Red Star Petroleum, a company that was incorporated 3 months ago, a company that has a P.O. box in the Cayman Islands. I reached over and flipped the folder open in front of him. A photo of a bank transfer stared up at him. And guess whose personal holding company is the sole beneficiary of Red Star Petroleum? Han slammed the folder shut. This is nonsense. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She's just a civilian. I am the CFO of this organization now, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying calm. And I know exactly what I'm talking about. I leaned in close to him. He smelled of fear and cheap cologne. You're skimming 20% off the top, Han. You're charging the syndicate for fuel you aren't buying, and pocketing the difference. Han opened his mouth to argue, But I cut him off. You're stealing from the king, Han. And you're doing it with a calculator from 1999. It's insulting to my intelligence. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Han looked around the room. He saw the other captains looking at him with calculation. He saw his death in their eyes. Panic took over. You lying bitch, Han roared. He lunged across the table. He wasn't reaching for the file. He was reaching for my throat. I didn't flinch. I didn't have to. Before Han's fingers could even graze the fabric of my white suit, a blur of motion erupted from the head of the table. Thud. It happened so fast my eyes barely registered it. 1 second Han was lunging. The next, his face was smashed against the mahogany table. Kyung-mok was standing over him. He had moved with the speed of a striking cobra. His hand was clamped over the back of Han's neck, pinning him to the wood. Kyung-mok didn't look at Han. He was looking at me. His expression was terrifying. His eyes were dark, burning with a mix of violence and absolute unadulterated pride. He looked at me like I had just handed him the world on a silver platter. She is not lying, Kyung-mok said. His voice was soft, barely a whisper, but it carried more weight than Han's shouting ever could. She is auditing. He squeezed Han's neck. A choked gurgle came from the traitor. Get him out of my sight, Kyung-mok ordered. 2 guards materialized from the shadows. They grabbed Han, who was now limp and weeping, and dragged him out of the room. The doors closed, sealing the noise out. The room was quiet again. The 11 remaining captains looked at me. There was no mockery in their eyes now. There was fear and respect. I stood there, smoothing the lapel of my suit. My heart was racing, but I kept my face impassive. Kyung-mok straightened his cuffs. He looked at the empty chair where Han had been sitting. Then he looked at his own chair, the massive, high-backed leather throne at the head of the table. He didn't sit back down. He walked over to his chair and pulled it out. He turned to me and gestured to the seat. A collective gasp went through the room. That was the king's seat. No one sat there. Ever. Sit, he said. It wasn't a request. It was a coronation. I walked to the head of the table. I sat down. The leather was still warm from his body. I looked down the long table at the 11 most dangerous men in the city. Kyung-mok didn't take another chair. He walked behind me. He placed his hands on the back of the chair, one hand resting possessively on my shoulder. He stood as my sentry, my enforcer. Continue the meeting, Kyung-mok said to the room. My wife has questions about the distribution ledger. He squeezed my shoulder gently. I picked up the next file. Right, I said, looking at the terrified man to my left. Let's talk about the warehouse overheads in Queens. We were the power couple now. I was the brain. He was the muscle. And God help anyone who tried to mess with our balance sheet. They say the safest place to be is standing next to the king. They are wrong. The safest place is behind the trigger. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of black ties and designer gowns. It was our engagement party, but in reality, it was a victory lap. The government audit was clear. The merger with the logistics firm was signed. We were untouchable. I wore a dress made of liquid silver chainmail. It was heavy, cold against my skin, and shimmered under the chandeliers like mercury. It wasn't just a gown, it was armor. I stood by Kyung-mok's side, my hand resting on his arm, playing the part of the devoted fiancé while simultaneously calculating the net worth of the room. You look tense, Kyung-mok murmured, leaning down to brush his lips against my temple. Smile, Kamaria. We won. I don't like it, I whispered, scanning the perimeter. Security is too thin near the service entrance. Variance in protocol. He chuckled, the sound vibrating through his chest. Always the auditor. Then the world turned sideways. It didn't start with a scream. It started with a pop. A sound distinct from a champagne cork. Sharper, flatter. The crystal chandelier above the buffet table exploded in a shower of glass rain. Get down. Kyung-mok didn't ask. He executed. He tackled me, his body a heavy shield driving me into the marble floor. The lights cut. Darkness swallowed the room, instantly replaced by the strobe light flashes of muzzle fire. Screams erupted. The polished veneer of civilization vanished, replaced by a stampede of terrified elites. But under the table, in the chaos, Kyung-mok was moving. He pulled a gun from a holster beneath his tuxedo jacket. He rolled off me, crouching low. "Stay here," he ordered. He moved into the darkness like a wraith. I watched from beneath the tablecloth as he engaged the shadows. 2 men in tactical gear rushed the stage. Bang, bang. 2 efficient, clean shots. They dropped. He was a machine. Lethal. Precise. But there were too many variables. A red laser dot danced across the floor, seeking me. A sniper. Kyung-mok saw it. He didn't dive for cover. He dove for me. He threw his body across mine just as the crack of a high-caliber rifle echoed. Thwack. The sound of the bullet hitting flesh was wet and sickening. Kyung-mok grunted, a sharp intake of breath, and his weight slumped heavily onto me. Kyung-mok. I scrambled out from under him. He was gripping his left shoulder. Blood, dark and hot, was soaking through his white shirt, ruining the perfect silk. He tried to raise his gun, but his hand was trembling. "I'm fine," he gritted out, his teeth stained with red. "You're not fine." The shooting stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. Well, a voice sneered from the smoke. "The king bleeds." Steps approached. Uneven, frantic steps. Jabari stepped into the small circle of light cast by an emergency exit sign. He looked deranged. He was wearing a tuxedo that was 2 sizes too big. Stolen, likely. His eyes were wild, dilated pupils swimming in bloodshot whites. He wasn't holding a cheap revolver this time. He was holding a semi-automatic pistol, and it was pointed directly at Kyung-mok's head. "Jabari," I breathed. He looked at me, then at Kyung-mok bleeding on the floor. A twisted smile stretched across his face. "He took everything from me, Cam." Jabari screamed, the gun shaking in his hand. "My money, my reputation, you. I had to live in a motel. I had to beg the parks for scraps. Now I take his life. Jabari, don't," I said, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my throat. "Put the gun down. The police are coming. Let them come." He laughed, a manic sound. "I'm doing the world a favor. I'm killing the monster." He racked the slide. He was going to do it. He was going to execute Kyung-mok right in front of me. Jabari wasn't looking at me. He was focused entirely on Kyung-mok. To him, I was still just the girlfriend, the victim, the accountant. He thought I was a liability. He forgot that I was the one who balanced the books. My eyes darted to the right. 3 feet away, lying next to the dead body of one of the park enforcers, was a Glock 19. I looked at the gun. Then, I looked at Jabari. Distance, 12 feet. Target size narrow. Variable, adrenaline. It was a physics problem. Force equals mass times acceleration. Trajectory is a straight line unless acted upon by gravity. I didn't scream. I didn't lunge. I slid. I threw myself across the marble, my silver dress hissing against the stone. My hand closed around the cold grip of the Glock. Jabari turned, startled by the movement. "Cam, what are you—" I didn't give him time to process. I rolled onto my back, lifted the gun and braced my wrist with my other hand. I didn't aim for his head. A headshot is fatal, and I wasn't a murderer. Not yet. I didn't aim for his chest. Too much margin for error with a vest. I aimed for the fulcrum. The structural weak point. I aligned the sights. Exhale. I pulled the trigger. The gun kicked hard against my palm. The flash blinded me for a microsecond. The bullet struck Jabari exactly where I intended, the left kneecap. It didn't just hit, it obliterated. The bone shattered. The structural integrity of his leg vanished. Jabari didn't even have time to scream before he collapsed. His leg folded backward at a sickening angle. Then, the scream came. A raw, guttural shriek of agony that tore through the ballroom. He dropped his gun, clutching his ruined leg, writhing on the floor. I stood up. My ears were ringing. My silver dress was smeared with Kyung-mok's blood. The gun was heavy in my hand, smoke curling lazily from the barrel. I walked over to Jabari. He looked up at me, his face gray with shock and pain, tears streaming down his face. He looked at the gun, then at me, unable to reconcile the woman he cheated on with the woman standing over him. You shot me," he gasped. "You were a bad debt, Jabari," I said coldly. I checked the safety and engaged it. Account closed. Camarilla, a rough voice called out behind me. I turned. Kyung-mok was sitting up. He was pressing a napkin to his bleeding shoulder, his face pale. But his eyes were blazing. He looked at Jabari screaming on the floor. Then he looked at me, standing in my silver armor holding a gun, the smoke clearing around me like a halo. He smiled. It was a bloody, pained, terrifyingly beautiful smile. That, he wheezed, was excellent aim. They say the higher the risk, the higher the reward. Looking out at the snow falling over the city we now own, I can confirm the math checks out. The penthouse was quiet, save for the crackling of the fire and the scratch of my fountain pen against paper. I was finalizing the acquisition of the Port Authority's new logistics contract, a legitimate, government-sanctioned billion-dollar deal. Across the room, Kyung-mok was handling the other side of the business. He was on the phone, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that I had grown to find soothing. "Tell the senator that if he blocks the zoning permit again," Kyung-mok said, casually wiping down the barrel of his pistol with a silk cloth, "I will not send a bribe. I will send his search history to his wife." He hung up. "The permit is approved." "Efficient," I noted, signing the final page. "We're up 40% year over year." "We are efficient," he agreed. I thought about Jabari. Last I heard, he was working the night shift at a gas station in Jersey, walking with a permanent limp and paying off his legal fees in installments. He was a write-off, a bad debt I had purged from the ledger. I pushed the chair back to stand up. Immediately, Kyung-mok was there. He moved faster than a man of his size should be able to, intercepting me before I could even fully rise. "Sit," he commanded, his hand hovering protectively near my waist. "You are not to exert yourself." "I'm just getting water, Kyung-mok," I sighed, looking down at the massive swell of my stomach. "I'm pregnant, not invalid." "You are carrying the heir to the syndicate," he said, his eyes dark and serious as he rested a hand on my belly. "And you are 8 months along." "The doctor said bed rest. The doctor is afraid of you," I reminded him. Just then, the baby kicked, a strong, sharp jab against his palm. Kyung-mok's stoic face broke into a look of pure, unadulterated awe. It was the only time the Silent King ever looked soft. "He strikes hard," Kyung-mok murmured. "He will be a fighter." "He will be an auditor," I corrected, covering his hand with mine. "He's kicking because you're hovering and messing up his schedule." Kyung-mok smirked, leaning down to kiss me. "He can be both. A king who knows how to count." I looked at him. My partner, my protector, my monster. I had lost a safe, predictable life with a man who pretended to be good, and I had gained a dangerous, chaotic empire with a man who knew exactly how bad he was. I spent my whole life trying to avoid risk. It turns out, the most dangerous investment I ever made was the only one that paid out. And that, my fierce hearts, is how you audit a king. If you enjoyed Camaria's reign, hit that like button until it breaks. Subscribe for more dangerous love stories. Until next time, stay petty, stay dangerous, and always keep your receipts. Good night.
I totally enjoyed this story. It's worth watching. 10 over 10. It has action, romance just perfect.